If anyone jumps in later, so be it. So I'll just kick things off.
Perfect.
And for those of you at home, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Solve Network. Tonight's guest expert is Valerie Jennings, who is an executive coach, and she's going to be speaking about EQ and leadership. I'm really excited to have her on because although we know each other and have worked together in various capacities, there is a lot of what she has an expertise in and a lot of what she's going to talk about tonight that I'm sure is going to be new and different. And although I know a little bit about EQ, I'm really interested to see how it fits into leadership. So without further ado, please take it away, and we'll be doing a discussion, a Q&A after the presentation.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks for having me here today. So I am going to share my screen and share my slides so that you can hear what I have to talk about today. Oops, I'm not going to share my Wi-Fi, share my screen. Okay. So what I'm here to talk to you guys today about is leadership, emotional intelligence, and this great model called radical candor. And so we'll dive into that in a moment. But first, I just wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Val, and I'm an executive coach. I have been coaching since about 2014. I have a long background in the corporate world. I've worked at Cisco. I've worked with a lot of high-tech companies. I've worked in HR, but the majority of my career was spent in supply chain management. So lots of business operations and supply chain experience. And I absolutely love what I do now, working as an executive coach, where I get to combine my business experience, my management and leadership experience with the world of coaching. And so I'm so excited to be here and to talk about what I like best and what I get nerdy about. And so why I'm here is, as a management and leadership coach, there's a few things I do. I work with leaders and their teams, and we focus on management and leadership, on their career, and on how to get teams to work together better. As a coach, I really like to look at people as a whole person. So people are their same selves, whether they're at home or at work. And the more we can try to integrate who people are as a leader and at home, kind of that authenticity, the stronger people will be at work and at home. So that's kind of my philosophy about how I work. And today we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence and radical candor. And so if we were a big group today, I would have us do a big exercise together. But since we don't, Shane, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. And I'd love for you, since you know me a little bit, what are a couple things, Shane, that you and I have in common?
I think that we're both genuinely interested in not only in people, but in things. And that, especially for this, I would say, it's like, how do teams work? How does this company operate? Like, what are their values? Like, what's their mission? I think we both really enjoy that, but I think we're also very interested in how to kind of make things work better, like finding solutions and providing kind of tips and tools.
Exactly. I think that's how we're alike too. And so we kind of share this same curiosity about how people can work together better and how people can be themselves and really have their best performance. And one of the reasons why I asked you about how we're the same and what we have in common is that that's an example of how we build empathy with other people. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, one of the pillars of emotional intelligence is actually empathy. And one of the ways that we can work on empathy is looking at people through the eyes of, how is this person like me? So this just quick little exercise that Shane and I did together is something that can quickly make us feel like we have something in common. And that's actually a way in which people can build empathy. And so empathy is really, really important. And it's just so ironic. I'll just say today is June 4th. And with everything going on in the world, I cannot emphasize again enough how important empathy is. But empathy is really, really important to leadership. And I wanted to share this quote about empathy from Barack Obama, where he says, "Learning to stand in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes, that's how peace begins. And it's up to you to make that happen." So empathy is a quality of character that can really change the world. And when I work with managers and leaders, they want to make impact and change in their employees and in business. And so one of the things that I work with them on as a coach is how to build empathy. So here's another quote about building empathy, which is empathy is about standing in someone else's shoes, feeling his or her heart, seeing with his or her eyes. Not only is empathy hard to outsource and automate, but it makes the world a better place. And so Shane, and those of you listening, I would highly recommend that you look up the work of Daniel Pink. He's one of my favorites. And what I love about this perspective is that when we think about high tech in the world of business, so much is outsourced and automated, but what we can't give to a machine and what we can't code is the sense of being able to empathize with other human beings. And this is really what makes people great leaders and what makes the world a better place. So one more quote really quick on this. Richard Branson, he's the CEO of Virgin Atlantic and among other things. He says great things can be achieved by leading through wisdom, empathy, and integrity with no other agenda other than humanity. So just being human. So when leaders work with me, one of the things I want to help them develop is a really good sense of empathy so that they can show their humanity to others. So many leaders get elevated to the point that they're at because they're really good at what they do. They're really good at their technology. They're really good at their craft in business. They have a lot of degrees, but comes a certain point in leadership where so much of the work that leaders do is about influencing and connecting with other people, that this quality of empathy becomes super, super important. And so when we think about emotional intelligence, there's a really great book that I want to introduce you guys to, which I'll talk about in just one second. But there's an intersection of power, or an intersection of greatness, an intersection of wisdom that comes from EQ. So you could say that emotional intelligence is EI, but the way we measure EQ is, well, the way we measure emotional intelligence is EQ. Same with IQ, which is the way we measure intelligence. So this combination of emotional intelligence and the intelligence of intellect is really what makes a leader great. So there's a book that I love. So if you are looking for a new book for your professional development or even your personal development, this is a book that I actually almost always have it on my desk to refer to all the time. I use it a lot with clients and worksheets. But just a little bit to teach you about what EQ is. So there's actually an assessment that you can take. And if it's something that interests you, feel free to reach out and I can help you take the assessment. But it's measured on a 30-point scale, 130-point scale, much like an IQ test. And it measures 15 different competencies. And we're going to talk about 2 of them today. And it also measures the relationship between the competencies. So it's not enough to just be good at one thing at the expense of another. We want our emotions to be balanced. So a good emotional intelligence assessment is going to measure the relationships between competencies. And the good thing about emotional intelligence is that it actually can be learned. So there's research that shows that we can actually develop our emotional intelligence and continue becoming more emotionally intelligent up until our 60s and 70s, whereas IQ is really maxed out at about age 25, 27 when our brain development stops. So EQ is one of these things that's based on experience. You can actually learn to get better at it, which is really important for leaders because in order to maximize their influence and their impact, they need to have really good EQ. So I was talking a little earlier about how emotional intelligence is about balance. So what we're going to dive into today is 2 of, I think, the most critical competencies of emotional intelligence, which are empathy, that we've talked about quite a bit, and assertiveness. So when you take an emotional intelligence assessment, this is one of the things that they look for is how well are you able to balance those 2 things. So let's dive into what that means. So assertiveness is really the ability to express your feelings in a non-offensive way. So signs of assertiveness are that you show respect for another person's point of view, that you're able to stand up for your point of view, even if there's a disagreement, and you have the ability to say no respectfully. And one of the foundational skills to be able to be assertive is to have empathy. So in order to express your feelings in a non-judgmental way, you have to have empathy for those around you. Aggression, on the other hand, is also something that's important to be able to show, but it's something to be very careful in using. So it means making your point and bringing forth your opinion without consideration of another person's thoughts or feelings. It leaves no room for compromise, shows no respect for other people's feelings or for their point of view, and it really forces the other person to take your side. And it's even sometimes where people who are super aggressive show public criticism. So it might surprise you to hear me say that this is actually important, but aggression can be important if you are in a dangerous situation. So if you're walking down the street and getting attacked in New York City, being able to act aggressively is actually really, really important. However, when leaders get this balance wrong and err too much on the side of aggression, there's no other way of looking at it than they're just an asshole. I mean, so this is not what we want from a leader. So this balance becomes really, really important. And so in the workplace, this balance of empathy, assertiveness, aggression is so beautifully demonstrated in another book that I'm going to recommend to you, which is this book called Radical Candor. So there's a woman named Kim Scott who used to be an executive at Google. And she wrote this book called Radical Candor, which really talks about how to be a strong, kick-ass boss without losing that sense of humanity. So she didn't specifically write the book to talk about assertiveness, aggression, and empathy, but she illustrates it so well that this is a book that I really recommend for my clients. So let's dive into what Kim's theory is, and you'll see how it starts to relate to empathy and aggression. Okay, so Kim Scott has a theory that the best form of communication is what she calls radical candor. And so she has a 2x2 or a 2x2, a 4x4, I guess it's called a 4x4, where she has a couple axes. So the top one is caring personally. So in emotional intelligence language, we would call this having empathy. And then she has another direction that she calls challenging directly, which you could say is being assertive. And so when you fall into anything but radical candor, you have the risk of really impacting relationships in a negative way. And so what I love about using this model with leaders is that they themselves can learn how to play in that radical candor quadrant. And they can also see in their teams when people are falling into these other quadrants called, so that if you have very little ability to challenge directly, but care too much personally, she calls that ruinous empathy. Manipulative insincerity is when you don't care personally and you don't challenge directly. Another word for that might be passive aggressive behavior. And then obnoxious aggression is when you challenge directly without caring about people. So what I really like to do with leaders and teams is take them deep into each one of these. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this today because just in respect for time. But just very quickly, ruinous empathy is where someone overuses the emotional intelligence of empathy. So they're just completely so worried about what other people think that they can't find themselves, they can't be assertive. So assertiveness, remember, has empathy and the ability to speak up for yourself. So when someone is in an organization or in leadership is too empathetic and avoids bringing up what they really think, we call that ruinous empathy. Manipulative insincerity is when you really don't care enough about others to really challenge what they think. So actually, Shane, I'm going to pick on you again for a second. One of the things you and I have done working together is given each other feedback on our work. So if I don't care about you, I might just say, oh, Shane looks great. But by me finding a way to, and that would be manipulatively insincere. So if I were using radical candor, I would care enough about you to tell you the truth. So manipulative insincerity is when people really don't care, and so therefore they don't say what they think. So that's manipulative insincerity. Obnoxious aggression, and I'm stumbling on my words tonight, is flat out aggression. It's just, I don't care what others have to say. I'm going to say what I have to say. I think I have the right to say what I'm going to say because I'm in charge. We could get into a conversation about politics here, I guess, but sometimes this happens where people think I have the right to say what I think. I have the right to tell you what I think and the right to be direct just because I'm a leader. But the problem is that when you do that publicly and you do that without showing empathy and care, you come across as an obnoxious leader. You really are aggressive and obnoxious. And so the good news is that leaders can really learn to be in that place that's radically candid. So they can step into their assertiveness, step into their empathy and working with a coach really helps. And what it does is when they can be in that space of radical candor, what it does is it builds trust with the team because people know that you care about them and that you're going to actually say what you think. It helps teams embrace conflict because it creates a space where it's okay to challenge one another directly as long as they do it with kindness, because it shows that you actually care about the work, you care about the people. So it's not an invitation to nitpick. It's not an invitation to overshare your deeply personal stuff. It's an invitation to be very professional in your workplace and also show that you care. So where to start if you want to kind of boost your radical candor is invite feedback from others. Invite people to challenge you. Jump in and start practicing this muscle. So show people that you care and show them that you can challenge them, that you can give them feedback. And it's just a great way to practice assertiveness and caring. So what we're really, in takeaway, in closing, just what we're really focusing on here is that EQ is absolutely critical to leadership. And you can increase your EQ through self-awareness and just practicing some of these concepts. So really thinking about your empathy, your assertiveness, and your aggressiveness. And this radical candor model really demonstrates how to balance these things really well. So if you're interested in learning more about radical candor, Kim Scott has some great videos on YouTube. You can just Google up her name and find some quick, easy videos that talk about where she talks about her model. And there's also really great videos on YouTube about empathy and assertiveness and aggression. So this is something that if you're interested in learning, it's actually not too hard to learn more of, but super, super important in leadership. So one thing that I always say is that it is kind to be clear. So that's what I'll leave you with today, is that if you're not clear, it's actually not kind. People you work with need to hear what you really think in a kind way.